In a crowded office, department head Gavin Prescott threw a stack of files onto the floor in front of the new intern and ordered her to kneel and pick up every page. 30 employees looked down at their screens. Only Michael Carter, a quiet single father who had worked there 8 years, stood up, placed himself between them, and demanded an apology. Gavin laughed and mocked them both in front of the entire floor. But he had no idea who the woman he had just humiliated really was, or why she was choosing to stay silent. Sterling Dynamics occupied 4 floors of a gray building on the west side of the city, and the operations department sat on the 3rd, where the light came in flat, and the carpet had been the same shade of industrial blue for 9 years. On that Monday morning, the floor filled as it always did. Badge readers, clicking coffee lids, snapping 30 people. Settling into a grid of desks that had been arranged for efficiency and never once for comfort. Nobody expected the day to matter. Nobody ever did. Claire Bennett arrived at 8:15 with a laminated badge that read, Intern, and a canvas bag that held nothing but a laptop and a notebook. She was in her early 30s, which made her older than most interns, and she wore a plain charcoal blazer that fit too well. To be cheap, and too quietly, to be noticed. She stopped at the edge of the floor and studied the room for a moment before she stepped into it like someone memorizing a place she intends to come back to. Human Resources had placed her in operations for a 12-week evaluation cycle. That was the story on the paperwork, and the paperwork had been prepared very carefully at corporate headquarters, 2 states away, by people who had been instructed not to ask questions. Claire had signed it under a name that was hers, and also not hers, and exactly one person knew the truth. Her name was Evelyn Brooks. She sat on the executive floor at headquarters, and she and Claire had agreed to speak once a week, and never from a company lane. Claire had her own reasons for the badge, and she had made herself a rule about it before she ever walked through the doors. A company could be read from its reports, or it could be read from its floor, and the two rarely matched. Reports were written by people who knew they were being read. She wanted to see how power moved through this branch when the people using it believed nobody important was watching, and that meant staying nobody for as long as she could stand it. The rule had a second half that she had not written down. Whatever she found, she would not act on a single incident. One bad manager could be removed in an afternoon, and the culture that had protected him for years would simply close over the hole and continue. She needed a pattern, documented, undeniable. Until she had it, she would keep her mouth shut and let the floor teach her. Gavin Prescott came out of his office before she had finished setting down her bag. I was somewhere in his 40s, well-built, with the kind of grooming that suggested he checked his reflection in dark monitors. He ran operations at the branch and had run it for 6 years. And in that time, he had learned that the fastest way to establish who he was to a new person was to be generous first. Generosity created debt. Debt created leverage. He had never once articulated that to himself in those words, but he had used it so consistently that it functioned as a principle. You must be Claire. He extended a hand and held hers a half-second past the point where it stopped being a handshake. I like to greet new people personally. It sets the tone. Come by my office when you're settled, and I'll walk you through how things really work around here. Across the floor at a desk near the window, Michael Carter looked up from his screen for about 2 seconds, and then looked back down. He had been at Sterling Dynamics for 8 years, which made him the longest tenured person in operations who had never been promoted, and he had stopped finding that remarkable somewhere around year 5. He was in his late 30s, quiet in a way that people mistook for dullness, and he handled the reconciliation work nobody wanted because it required patience and produced no glory. He was a single father. There was a mortgage and a health plan attached to one income, and those two facts had shaped every decision he had made inside that building for a long time. Michael had watched Gavin do the personal greeting before. He had watched it 4 or 5 times. He knew what it looked like at the start, and he knew what it usually looked like 6 weeks in, and he had learned that saying so out loud cost more than it accomplished. So he entered his numbers and said nothing, as he had said nothing about a great many things. Claire went to Gavin's office that morning because refusing on the first day would have been a statement, and she was not there to make statements yet. He talked for 20 minutes about the branch, about how corporate did not understand the floor, about how the people who advanced here advanced because someone decided to advance them. He offered to mentor her personally. He asked whether she was seeing anyone framed as small talk, and then moved past it smoothly enough that she could not object without seeming humorless. She thanked him for his time and left. By Wednesday, it was coffee. By Friday, it was a suggestion that they discuss her development over dinner somewhere quieter, because the office was full of people who liked to talk. Claire declined each one the same way warmly, without hesitation, and without an excuse that could be argued with. She had learned a long time ago that excuses invited negotiation, and that a clean no did not. The following week, Gavin stopped pretending it was about mentorship. He caught her in the corridor by the file room close enough that she had to decide whether to step back, and told her that the people who did well in this department were the ones who understood how to build a relationship with the right person. He said the word relationship slowly enough that it carried its own translation. He told her that interns came and went, but the ones who were remembered because someone chose to remember them. Claire held his eyes and said that she preferred to be remembered for her work. Something in his face closed. It was not anger, not yet. It was the look of a man recalculating an investment, and it lasted less than a second before the professional mask came back down. And he told her the report on his desk needed a second look before end of day. She walked back to her desk and understood that she had just crossed a line, and that from now on, she would be the most inconvenient person in the room. Marcus Reed had seen the corridor conversation from the copier and had gone back to his desk without a word. He was a senior analyst, well-liked quick with a joke, and he had a specific talent for standing 3 feet outside anything that could become a problem. He had watched Gavin's method operate for years, and had built his career on the principle that seeing something and reporting something were entirely separate acts. He told himself that afternoon that he had not really seen anything at all. What Claire noticed in her first 2 weeks was not the men who avoided trouble. It was the one who quietly cleaned up after it. Twice she watched Michael Carter stay late to fix a variance that belonged to someone else's ledger, and both times, the person whose ledger it was received the credit, and Michael said nothing. Once she watched him walk a panicking junior through a submission deadline at 7 in the evening without ever mentioning that he had his own work waiting. He did not perform any of it. He did not make sure anyone saw. He simply did the thing, and then went home. She began keeping notes on him, the way she was keeping notes on everything else, and the notes on him were the only ones that did not depress her. The reassignment came the next Monday, and it came without an announcement. Gavin dropped a printed brief on Claire's desk at 9 in the morning and told her he needed the quarterly variance report by end of day Tuesday. It was work the department routinely allotted 3 days to, and it was work. No intern in the history of the branch had been given at all. He delivered it casually without eye contact, already turning away, which was itself the message. She had it on his desk by 4 o'clock Tuesday, and it was clean. 2 days later, he pulled a data set out of the archive that had been sitting unfinished since March, several thousand rows of vendor records that had defeated 2 employees before her and told her he needed it. Reconciled before the afternoon meeting. He gave her 5 hours. He was not testing her capacity, and she knew it. He was building a file. She reconciled it in 4, and in the process, she found 7 duplicate vendor entries that had been quietly inflating a cost line for most of a year. That was the part he had not planned for. By the end of the 3rd week, the floor had started to talk and the talk had shifted. People who had introduced themselves to Claire out of politeness were now stopping by her desk with actual questions. 2 of the junior analysts began routing their reconciliations past her before submission because she caught things. She had, without campaigning for it, become useful in a way that made her visible. Gavin felt it the way a man feels a draft in a room he owns. He made his move in the Thursday operations meeting in front of 18 people, and he made it look spontaneous. I was walking the room through a throughput problem in the fulfillment pipeline, when he stopped and turned toward the back row, where Claire sat with her notebook. "Claire, you've been with us 3 weeks. Why don't you tell the room why our processing time on the reconciliation queue has gotten worse instead of better since we automated it?" It was a genuinely difficult question. It was also a question 3. Managers in that room had failed to answer for 6 months, and everyone present understood that it had been aimed rather than asked. Claire set down her pen and answered it. She explained that the automation had been applied to the matching step, but not to the exception step. Every record that failed the automated match was still routed to a human queue, and because automated matching had increased throughput on the front end, the exception queue was now receiving more items per day than it had before automation existed. The bottleneck had not been removed. It had been relocated and made invisible. Then she said the exception queue could be split by failure type, that roughly 70% of the failures came from 3 recurring vendor formatting issues, and that if those 3 were handled by a rule rather than by a person, the queue would clear in a fraction of the current time. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Dana Whitfield, who ran the fulfillment desk and had been complaining about that queue since February, said quietly that she had asked for exactly that split for 2 quarters and had been told it was not a priority. Gavin thanked Claire for the input and moved to the next agenda item. He did not look at her for the rest of the meeting, and afterward he stood at the window of his office for a long time, looking at the floor through the glass, watching 2 analysts stop at her desk on their way back to their own. He had spent 6 years making certain that this department ran on his judgment, that information arrived at his desk and left it as his decision, that competence in the room was something he distributed rather than something that occurred on its own. She had answered a question he could not answer in front of people who worked for him, and she had done it without a single note of triumph in her voice, which somehow made it worse. He stopped thinking about whether Claire Bennett could do the work. He started thinking about how to prove she could not. The opportunity came the following Tuesday, when he assigned her the operational performance report for the internal quarterly review. It was the one document the branch produced that headquarters actually read line by line, and giving it to an intern was either an act of confidence or a trap, and nobody on the floor believed it was the first. Claire spent 2 days on it. She pulled the revenue figures from the ledger system, the cost allocations from procurement, and the efficiency ratios from the fulfillment logs. And she cross-checked all 3 against each other twice, because the vendor archive had already taught her that this branch's systems did not always agree with themselves. She finished at 8:40 on Wednesday evening, verified the totals of final time, and saved the completed file to the shared operations folder where every report in the department lived. Michael was still at his desk when she left. He looked up and told her to have a good night, and she said the same, and that was the entire exchange. He shut down at 9:20 and drove home, and it was only when he pulled into his street that he realized he had left a folder of late reconciliations on his desk that he needed for a 7 o'clock start. Gavin came back to the building at 9:50. The floor was dark, except for the emergency lighting and the glow of the vending machine near the elevators. He did not turn on the overheads. He sat down at his own workstation, entered his own credentials, and opened the shared operations folder. Because in 6 years of running that department, nobody had ever once suggested to him that the shared folder kept a record of who touched what and when. It was a folder. Folders held things. He had never thought about it beyond that. He opened Claire's file, and he did not delete anything, because deletion was obvious. Instead, he changed 9 figures. He adjusted 3 revenue entries in the second quarter block by amounts small enough to look like transcription errors. He shifted 2 cost allocations from one category to another, so the departmental totals no longer summed. He altered 4 efficiency ratios, so they contradicted the fulfillment data on the following page. Then he saved the file, closed it, and sat in the dark for a moment looking at the screen. The beauty of it, as he understood the situation, was that none of it would look like sabotage. It would look exactly like what happens when someone is given work above their level and does not have the experience to check it. It would look like a woman who had impressed a few people with a clever answer in a meeting and then failed the moment she was handed something real. He shut down the workstation and went home at 10:10. Michael pulled back into the lot at 10:15 to collect his folder. Gavin's car was gone, but the parking space nearest the entrance, the one with the department head's name stenciled on the curb, still held the wet outline of a vehicle that had been sitting there in the rain. Michael went up, took the folder off his desk, noticed that the workstation in the glass office was still warm to the touch, and thought nothing of it for another 8 days. Claire arrived at 7:40 the next morning, printed her presentation copies straight from the shared folder without reopening the source file because she had verified it twice the night before, and set them on the conference room table in a neat stack. She felt the particular calm that comes from work that is finished. Michael watched her from across the floor and thought she looked for once like someone who was not braced for something. At 9 o'clock, Gavin walked into the conference room with a coffee in one hand and a folder under his arm, and greeted the room pleasantly. He knew exactly what was about to happen. Claire had been speaking for 4 minutes when Gavin set down his coffee. She was on the second page, walking the room through the revenue block, and the numbers were coming out of her mouth exactly as she had verified them on Wednesday evening. 11 people sat around the table. Marcus Reed was near the door with his laptop open. Dana Whitfield had a printed copy in front of her and was following along with a pen. "Stop." Gavin lifted a hand. "Claire, go back. Read me the second quarter revenue line again." She read it. "Now read me the total at the bottom of the page." She read that too and heard it before anyone else in the room did. The total did not follow from the entries above it. She looked at the figure, then at the entries, then at the figure again, and for the first time since she had walked into that building, something moved in her face. Gavin opened his own folder and worked through the document page by page with the patient thoroughness of a public servant. The cost allocations were in the wrong categories. The efficiency ratios on page 4 contradicted the fulfillment data on page 5. He read each discrepancy aloud, and then waited, and the waiting was the part that did the damage. "I verified these Wednesday night," Claire said. "All 3 sources. Twice. Then either the systems lied to you or you didn't." He closed the folder. This is what happens when someone is handed a document above their level and decides confidence is a substitute for experience. I want everyone here to understand that this is not a small thing. Headquarters reads this report. Dana looked down at her copy and said nothing. Marcus adjusted his laptop screen half an inch and kept his eyes on it. Claire could have asked when he had last opened the shared folder. The question was already fully formed in her mind, and she could feel exactly how it would land in a room of 11 people, and she did not ask it. She had no proof. An accusation without proof would end her placement in an afternoon and hand him a clean narrative on the way out, and it would leave everything underneath him untouched. So she said she would correct it, and she sat down. Gavin caught her outside the conference room afterward and told her he needed the full report rebuilt from source, along with a written explanation of the errors, and he needed both by Monday morning. He also gave her the vendor onboarding backlog and 2 process audits that belonged to people who had been on the floor for years. The workload was not designed to be completed. It was designed to be documented as incomplete. She went back to her desk and did not open the report. Instead, she opened the shared folder properties and started reading. What she found was not conclusive, and it was more than nothing. The operations report carried a modification timestamp of 9:58 on Wednesday evening. She had saved it at 8:40 and left the building at 8:50. Someone had altered the file after she went home, and the folder had recorded that it happened even if the summary view did not show her by whom. Claire copied the timestamp into her notebook, then copied the file itself to her local drive, and then, because she no longer assumed anything in this branch would still be there, tomorrow she copied it a second time to a personal drive that had nothing to do with Sterling Dynamics at all. She had a fact now. She did not yet have a name attached to it. Michael found her in the break room at 6:30 that evening, refilling a cup of coffee she had already let go cold once. He had heard about the meeting, the way everything traveled on that floor secondhand, and slightly worse each time. "You want some advice you didn't ask for," he said. Claire turned around. "Go ahead. Whatever you're about to do next, do it slower than you want to." He leaned against the counter. "I've been here 8 years. You're not the first person he's decided to be finished with. There was a scheduler named Roger Hale about 4 years ago who pushed back on him in a meeting. 6 weeks later, Roger's evaluation came back with things in it that nobody who worked with him would recognize. He was gone by the end of that quarter, and he never found out where any of it came from. And nobody said anything. People said things to each other." He looked at his cup. "That's not the same, and I know it." Claire studied him. She had been watching this man clean up other people's ledgers for 3 weeks, and she found that she wanted to hear him answer something directly. Then why hasn't anyone stopped him? Michael did not have a fast answer. He thought about the mortgage and the health plan in the 8 years, and about the fact that a man who has never been promoted has very little to trade and needs everything he has. "Because the people who could stop him are the people he writes evaluations for," he said. "And the people who write his evaluation are 2 states away and read a report he prepares himself. That's not an accident. That's a design." She wrote that sentence down later that night, word for word, and it stayed with her longer than any of the numbers. She rebuilt the entire report over the weekend. She pulled every figure from source a second time, rebuilt the cost allocation tables from scratch, and rederived the efficiency ratios from the raw fulfillment logs rather than the summary layer, producing a document that was, if anything, cleaner than the original. She printed it Monday morning, put it in a folder, and walked it to Gavin's office at 9:15. I was not in his office. He was standing in the middle of the floor, near the central aisle, where the sightlines from every desk converged, and he had put himself there deliberately, and he had been waiting for her. "Is that it?" She held it out. "It's complete. Every figure rebuilt from source, and there's a summary of the discrepancies on the first page." Gavin took the folder from her hand. He did not open it. He held it up so the 30 people at their desks could see what it was, and then he spoke at a volume that had nothing to do with the distance between them. "3 weeks ago, I gave this department's most important quarterly document to an intern because I was told she was exceptional. What I got back was a document I had to correct in front of 11 people. And now I'm handed a second draft, and I'm supposed to believe this one is different. He turned the folder over in his hands. This isn't worth reading. He opened his hands and let it fall. The folder struck the carpet on its edge and came apart, and the pages went out across the floor in a long, uneven fan, some sliding under the nearest desk, one coming to rest against the leg of a chair 15 feet away. The sound it made was small. What followed it was not. Every keyboard on that floor stopped. Gavin looked at Claire and let the silence sit for 3 full seconds before he spoke, and when he did, his voice had dropped into something conversational, which made it worse than shouting. "Pick them up." Claire did not move. He took one step forward, closing the distance to something under an arm's length, and said it again with a specificity that removed any possibility of misunderstanding. "Every page, on your knees." Nobody in the room breathed. Dana Whitfield, who had told a meeting 2 weeks earlier that Claire had been right about the exception queue, looked at her screen. The 2 junior analysts who had been routing their reconciliations past Claire's desk found reasons to be elsewhere in their own work. Marcus Reed stood at the end of the aisle with a stack of printouts in his hands, close enough to read the expression on Claire's face, and he did not put the printouts down. Claire turned her head and looked at the room. She did it slowly, deliberately, and she took her time about it. And what she was doing was not searching for rescue. She had a phone in her pocket with one number in it that could have ended this in under a minute. She could have said a single sentence and watched the color leave his face, and she had never in her adult life wanted to say a sentence more than she wanted to say that one. She was waiting to find out whether anyone in a room of 30 people would speak for someone who had nothing. That was the entire question. That was what she had come to this branch to learn, and no report from any consultant in the country could have answered it. And it was being answered right now while the pages of her work lay on the carpet. 6 seconds passed, then 8. Not one person stood, and Claire understood with a clarity that felt physical that she had her answer, that the answer was the worst available one, and that she was going to have to live with having asked the question this way. Then a chair scraped back at the far end of the floor. Michael Carter came up the aisle without hurrying. He was not a large man. He had no title, and there was nothing about him that had ever commanded a room. Every person watching understood exactly what his arithmetic looked like, and understood that he was about to get it wrong on purpose. He stopped between Claire and Gavin and turned to face his department head. "Pick them up yourself, then apologize to her." Gavin laughed. It was genuine, which was the strange part. He looked at Michael the way you look at something that has malfunctioned in an entertaining way, and then he looked past him at the 30 people who were now openly watching. Michael Carter, 8 years. He said it to the room rather than to Michael. 8 years in this department, the same desk, the same pay grade, and now he wants to tell me how to run my floor. Do you understand why you're still where you are? Because this is what you do. You spend yourself on things that don't return anything. Michael did not move. Gavin turned to Claire, and his voice changed register, dropping into something instructional. "And you need to learn where you sit. You are an intern. You have been in this building 28 days. The fact that a few people were impressed by you does not make you a colleague. It does not make you my equal, and the sooner you understand your position, the easier this will be for everyone." He came back to Michael. "You're standing in the middle of a floor telling your department head what to do in front of 30 people over an intern who will not be here in a month. Think about what you're spending, because if you say one more word to me, I will make sure you are not here either, and you know that I can." Michael knew that he could. I knew the evaluation cycle and how it worked and who signed it. He knew what a termination in his position would do to a household running on one income, and he knew there was no version of the next 12 months in which this was a survivable decision. He stayed exactly where he was. Gavin looked at him for a long moment, then bent and picked up a thing straightened and walked back to his office, and the door closed with a control that was more frightening than a slam. Michael knelt down and began gathering the pages. After a moment, Claire knelt beside him and gathered them too, and the two of them worked in silence in the middle of the floor while 30 people found things to look at, and neither of them said a word until every page was back in the folder. What followed over the next 10 days was not aimed at Claire at all. On Wednesday, Michael was pulled off the systems migration project, the only high-visibility work he had touched in 3 years. Gavin sent the notice by email at 7 in the morning and cited capacity. On Friday, Michael's mid-cycle evaluation appeared in the portal, with 4 new entries in the concerns field that had not existed the previous quarter, including a line about resistance to direction and a line about conduct inconsistent with departmental standards. The following Tuesday, Gavin called him into the office and slid a printed statement across the desk. It described the incident on the floor as a disruption initiated by an intern who had behaved unprofessionally when receiving performance feedback, and it required a witness signature confirming that account. Gavin explained reasonably that signing it would resolve the concerns in the evaluation that the systems migration assignment could be reconsidered, and that nobody needed this to become a larger conversation. Michael read it twice and set it down on the desk. No, Gavin capped his pen. I want you to be very clear about what you're choosing. I am. Meanwhile, Claire had stopped sleeping much. She had a timestamp, and the timestamp was not enough, so she went looking for what sat underneath it. The shared folder's summary view showed modification times, but the operations directory also carried a system-level access log retained for 90 days, and that log recorded credentials. The entry for 950A. Wednesday evening was attached to an account named G. Prescott. She sat with that for a while, and then she did the thing that changed the shape of everything, which was to stop looking at her own file and start reading the 90-day window as a whole. There were 4 other after-hours modification events on documents belonging to people who had not been in the building. 2 were evaluation files. 1 was a project assessment for the fulfillment desk. In every case, the account was the same. 90 days was as far back as the branch retained anything. So that night, she called Evelyn Brooks from the parking garage and asked her to pull the archived system backups held at headquarters, which went back 6 years and which nobody at this branch had ever had a reason to think about. Evelyn had them to her in 19 hours. Then, Claire cross-referenced the names. Roger Hale, the scheduler, Michael had mentioned, had received an evaluation with 3 concern entries added. 9 days after his review meeting had formally closed. A procurement analyst named Priscilla Vance had a promotion recommendation entered into the system, and then 6 days later, removed. There were others, and in each case, the person had at some point in the preceding quarter done something that put them crosswise with the man who ran the floor. 2 of them were former interns. Both had left the program early. Both had filed a note with the branch complaint channel in their final week, and that channel terminated at the desk of the department head. And neither note appeared anywhere in the record after the day it was submitted. Michael Carter's file was in there too, 4 separate times across 8 years, and each instance sat within a month of a promotion cycle. Claire sat back in her chair at midnight in an empty building and understood that what had happened to her was not an incident. It was a mechanism. It had been running for years, and it had been able to run because the only report headquarters ever received about the culture of this branch was written by the man operating it. She copied everything. Local drive. Then the personal drive, methodically file by file, and log entry by log entry, and she finished at 1:15 in the morning. At 9:05 the next morning, her system access was revoked. The screen simply refused her credentials twice, and when she called the help desk, she was told the request had come from department management and that she would need to speak with Mr. Prescott. Gavin did not make her come to him. He walked out onto the floor at 9:20 with a printout in his hand and told her at a volume that reached the nearest 6 desks that she had accessed personnel and system files outside the scope of an internship that it constituted a serious breach, and that he had already submitted a recommendation to terminate her placement, effective immediately. Then he informed the floor. There would be a full department meeting at 9 the following morning. He had requested a senior representative from corporate headquarters, and headquarters had confirmed that someone would attend. He said the representative was coming to review a personnel matter, and he said it looking at Michael. What Gavin did not know was that his request had landed on Evelyn Brooks's desk at 4 that afternoon, that she had forwarded it to one person before responding, and that the answer had come back in 4 words. Send yourself. I'll be there. That evening, Michael waited for Claire by the elevators. He's got a signature line with my name on it, and a meeting tomorrow, he said. That's not a coincidence, and we both know it. You should call whatever contact you have at headquarters tonight and get yourself out of this before they put you in a room with him. And you? I'm 8 years in and unpromoted with a bad evaluation in the system. There's no exit that's clean. He shrugged. You've been here 5 weeks. Don't spend your future on my situation. Claire looked at him for a long moment. If standing up for me tomorrow costs you everything, she said. Would you do it again? Michael answered without any delay at all. Yes. Being an intern doesn't mean he gets to treat you like that. She did not respond. She stood there in the corridor and looked at him, and the elevator came and opened and closed again without either of them getting into it. That was the answer she had needed. The conference room on the 3rd floor held 30 chairs when it was configured for a full department meeting, and by 8:55 the next morning, every one of them was occupied, and 4 people were standing along the back wall. Gavin had come in early to set it up himself. He had placed the podium at the front, angled the long table and the outer rows of chairs, so the room faced it, and set a folder on the podium shelf with a printed statement inside. I was wearing a different suit than usual. He had the specific energy of someone who has rehearsed in his car. Claire sat at the far end of the conference table, with her laptop closed in front of her, and her badge clipped to her jacket where it had been for 6 weeks. Her system access had been revoked the previous morning and had not been restored. Michael sat in a chair against the side wall and had not spoken to anyone since he walked in. Evelyn Brooks arrived at 9:01. She was somewhere past 50, silver-haired in a dark suit that had been tailored rather than bought, and she came through the door with a leather portfolio under one arm and did not introduce herself to anyone. Gavin met her halfway across the room, shook her hand warmly, and directed her to a chair beside the podium, which she took without comment. She set the portfolio on her lap and did not open it. Marcus Reed stood at the back wall with his arms folded near the door. Gavin began at 9:05. Thank you all for being here. I don't schedule full department meetings without cause, and I want to be direct about the cause, because this floor has earned a straight explanation. He opened his folder. 6 weeks ago, this department accepted an intern into a 12-week evaluation placement. Claire Bennett. He said the name without looking at her. I want to be fair about this. She arrived with confidence and made an impression on some of you early. But confidence is not competence, and everyone in this room needs to understand the difference because it is the difference that costs companies money. He walked the room through it methodically, and it was a genuinely well-constructed presentation, which was the most damning thing about it. He described the quarterly operations report and the errors he had identified in front of 11 witnesses. He described a second submission he characterized as unverified. He described a disruption on the floor when performance feedback had been delivered. Then he arrived at the part he had built the entire morning around. 2 nights ago, this intern accessed system-level directories and personnel evaluation files that are restricted to management. She did it after hours using an operations credential that was never scoped for it, and she did it without authorization from me or from anyone else in this building. He looked at Evelyn Brooks for the first time. I've submitted a recommendation to terminate the placement immediately. I'd also note that the placement was originated by headquarters, and I would respectfully suggest that whoever approved it did not do adequate diligence. Evelyn Brooks wrote nothing down. Gavin closed the folder and set it aside, and his tone shifted into something almost regretful. There is a second matter, and I take no pleasure in it. Michael Carter, would you come up here, please? Every head in the room turned. Michael stood, walked to the front, and stopped beside the podium. He did not look at the room. He looked at Gavin, and he waited. Gavin took a single sheet from the folder and laid it on the podium, facing outward, so that the nearest seats could see it existed. Michael has been with this department for 8 years. I want the room to understand that I did not want to be here. What I need from him is a signature on a witness statement confirming what he saw on this floor 10 days ago, which is that an intern responded to legitimate performance feedback with unprofessional conduct. He turned the sheet a few degrees toward Michael. Sign it, and the concerns in your current evaluation are resolved, and we move forward. Refuse, and I will process your termination alongside hers today. Those are the 2 options. I'm giving them to you in front of your colleagues because I want it on the record that you were given a choice. The room did not make a sound. Claire did not turn her head. She sat with her hands flat on the table in front of her, aware of exactly how much power she was holding and exactly how long it would take to use it. Michael looked down at the statement. He read it, and he read it slowly. And he was not reading the words because he already knew the words. He was working through arithmetic that had only one sensible answer, and he was preparing to give the other one standing at a podium in a room he had walked past every working day for 8 years. Then he put the sheet back down and let go of it. No, Gavin exhaled through his nose and smiled at the room, and it was not a performance of disappointment. It was closer to relief. There it is. 8 years, and he ends it in a conference room on his feet, defending an intern who will not be in this building after lunch. I want the younger people here to remember this moment, because this is what it looks like when someone decides a gesture is worth more than a career. He turned toward the podium chair. Ms. Brooks, you can terminate them both. Evelyn Brooks did not move. She sat for 2 or 3 seconds with the portfolio still closed on her lap, and then she stood and the room registered the change before it understood it, because she stood like the ranking person present in a room that was about to find out. Mr. Prescott, she said, do you honestly not know who she is? Gavin's expression did not change immediately. It took a moment to arrive, and when it did, it arrived in stages. I'm sorry. Nobody answered him. Claire pushed her chair back and stood up. She reached up with one hand, unclipped the laminated badge from her jacket, and looked at it briefly. Claire Bennett, intern operations, and then walked forward and set it face up on the podium next to the witness statement, where the front of the room could read both at once. She left it there. Claire Sterling, Evelyn Brooks said to the room. Appointed Chief Executive of Sterling Dynamics by the board, 7 weeks ago. She has been in this branch for 6 of those weeks at her own request, and with the board's authorization, conducting a direct operational assessment of this location. I've been her point of contact at headquarters. Your request for a senior representative came to my desk yesterday afternoon. She's the one who decided which of us would answer it. The silence in that room had a texture to it. Dana Whitfield put her hand over her mouth, one of the junior analysts who had been routing reconciliations past Claire's desk, sat down very suddenly in a chair that was not his. Marcus Reed at the back wall closed his eyes. Michael Carter stood beside the podium and did not move at all. I was not thinking about the branch or the board or the badge on the shelf. He was thinking about a standing motionless on industrial blue carpet. 10 days earlier, with her work scattered around her feet, and about the fact that he had believed completely, and without any doubt whatsoever, that she was a 28-day intern with no title and nothing to give any day of anyone. He had not stood up because he knew she had power. He had stood up when he was certain she had none. Claire opened her laptop on the table and turned it toward Evelyn, who connected it to the room display without being asked, and the wall screen came alive with a directory listing. "I'll start with the operations report," Claire said, and her voice in that room was not the voice anyone on that floor had heard for 6 weeks. I saved the completed file to the shared operations directory at 8:40 on a Wednesday evening and left the building at 8:50. The file was modified at 9:58 that same night. 9 figures were altered, 3 revenue entries, 2 cost allocations, 4 efficiency ratios. Nothing deleted. Changed. She brought up the next screen, and the log entry filled the wall with the account name in the credential column, large enough to read from the back of the room. G. Prescott. The operations directory maintains a system-level access log with credential attribution. That's the account that made the change. It's on the screen behind me, and it will be in the investigator's file by this afternoon. Gavin said nothing. He had gone a color that people would describe differently afterward. "I could have raised this the morning after that meeting," Claire went on. "I didn't because I would have removed one manager and left everything underneath him exactly where it was. So I kept looking. Here's what's underneath." The screen changed again. Within the 90-day retention window, there are 4 additional after-hours modification events on files belonging to employees who were not in the building. 2 are evaluation files. The branch only keeps 90 days, so headquarters pulled the archived backups going back 6 years, and the pattern is continuous. A scheduler named Roger Hale received 3 concern entries added to his evaluation 9 days after his review meeting had formally closed. A procurement analyst, Priscilla Vance, had a promotion recommendation entered into the system and removed 6 days later. In every instant, I've been able to reconstruct the individual had, within the preceding quarter, disagreed with the head of this department in a way that other people could see. She looked up. Michael Carter's file appears 4 times across 8 years. Each occurrence falls within 1 month of a promotion cycle. Michael turned toward the screen for the first time. "There's one more category," Claire said, "and I want to be careful with it, because the people involved are no longer here and did not choose to be part of this. 2 interns from previous cycles left the program early. Both filed a note with the branch complaint channel in their final week. That channel terminates at the department head's desk. Neither note exists